Tonight, FBI and ICE agents storm a Miami high-rise, dismantling a massive fentanyl network in just 63 seconds.
It took 63 seconds. 63 seconds from the moment the first ram hit the steel-reinforced door of a waterfront condo in Brickell to the moment the last of 11 suspects lay face down on imported Italian marble, flex-cuffed and silent. 63 seconds to dismantle what had taken Ricardo El Reloj Medina 7 years to build. But here's the thing, most people will never understand about a takedown like that. Those 63 seconds were the shortest part. The real story, the one that matters, began 14 months earlier in a place nobody expected, and with a phone call nobody was supposed to hear. This is the story of Operation Coastal Fracture. And if you think you know how drug networks operate in Miami, you're about to find out how wrong you are. In November of the year before the raid, where an FBI field agent named Carolyn Marsh was working a case that had nothing to do with narcotics. She was embedded in a financial crimes unit, tracking a Ponzi scheme running through luxury car dealerships in South Florida, the kind of white-collar grift that makes for dull paperwork and duller court proceeding. But Marsh had a habit that her supervisors alternately praised and cursed. She pulled threads. When one of the dealership's shell companies routed a payment through a freight logistics firm registered in Panama, most agents would have flagged it and moved on. Marsh didn't move on. She requested transactional records from FinCEN, cross-referenced the Panamanian entity with Treasury Department databases, and found something that turned her stomach cold. The freight company, Grupo Mareas Pacifico on paper, a la ghost in practice, had processed over $400 million in the previous 18 months. The money flowed through a cascade of LLCs in Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada before pooling in Miami area real estate holdings, restaurant chains, and a string of medical billing companies that had never billed a single patient. And at the center of this financial architecture sat a name that Marsh had never encountered, but that DEA agents along the southwestern border knew well. Ricardo Medina, a mid-level logistics coordinator for a cartel faction operating out of Jalisco who had, without anyone in federal law enforcement fully realizing, migrated his entire operation to the humid shores of South Florida. Medina wasn't a kingpin in the traditional sense. He didn't command armies or control plazas in Mexico. What he controlled was something arguably more valuable: movement, routes, the invisible conveyor belts that carried product from point of origin to point of sale. He had started as a trucking dispatcher for CJNG-affiliated operators in Guadalajara, coordinating shipments of methamphetamine and fentanyl precursors north across the border. But Medina saw what the old-school bosses couldn't. The border was a bottleneck, and bottlenecks attract attention. So he did something radical. He moved the final stage of production and the entire distribution hub to East Coast, Miami, the city where money launders itself just by existing. When Marsh brought her findings to her section chief, a veteran named Dale Ortega, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called ICE Homeland Security Investigations. Within a week, a joint task force was assembled that would eventually include the FBI, ICE, DEA, and elements of DHS intelligence. They gave it a name that Marsh thought sounded like a geology term: coastal fracture, as in the moment a continent breaks. The first 3 months were agonizing. The task force had financial threads, but they had no faces, no voices, no geography beyond corporate filing. Medina himself was a phantom. His last confirmed photograph was 6 years old, taken at a cousin's wedding in Zapopan, and even then he was partially turned from the camera, as though he'd always known someone might come looking. ICE analysts ran facial recognition against every database they had access to: TSA records, passport photos, social media scrapes, and came up empty. The man had entered the United States, presumably, but there was no record of how or when. It was an ICE field agent, Marcus Teague, who proposed the approach that would crack the case open. Teague had spent 8 years working human trafficking and migrant smuggling operations through Central America and had developed a network of confidential informants in the seasonal labor pipeline that flowed through South Florida's agricultural zone. One of those informants, a Guatemalan man identified in court documents only as CI-19, mentioned during a routine debrief that he'd been approached about driving medical supplies from a warehouse in Homestead to various addresses in Miami-Dade County. The pay was extraordinary: $2,000 per trip, cash, for what amounted to 40 minutes of driving. CY-19 had declined, mostly out of fear, but he remembered the name of the man who'd recruited him, someone called Luca. No last name, just Luca. Teague brought this to the task force, And what happened next is a testament to the kind of interagency cooperation that rarely makes headlines because it's unglamorous and painstaking. FBI analysts cross-referenced the Homestead Warehouse address with property records and found it leased to one of Grupo Mareas Pacifico's Delaware subsidiary. DEA intelligence officers flagged Luca as a possible alias for Luca Ferreira Castanho, a Brazilian-born courier with prior arrests in Portugal and Colombia for cocaine trafficking. ICE ran immigration records and found that a Luca Ferreira had entered the U.S. on a B-1 business visa 2 years prior and never left. Now they had a face, and faces lead to phones, and phones lead to everything. Then the Bureau secured a Title III wiretap on a phone number associated with Ferreira's known address in Kendall. For 6 weeks, the intercepts yielded little. Grocery orders, calls to a woman in São Paulo, mundane fragments of a life that appeared almost aggressively ordinary. But on a Thursday evening in late March, Ferreira received a call from an encrypted messaging app that the FBI's technical unit managed to partially intercept through a lawful workaround involving the phone's metadata and a cooperating telecommunications provider. The voice on the other end spoke in clipped, business-like Spanish, and though the audio was fractured, 3 phrases came through with devastating clarity. The shipment from Lazaro, 900 kilos, and the doctor's building, 900 kilos. Now, if that referred to fentanyl, and given the CJNG connection, the task force believed it did, they were looking at enough poison to kill tens of millions of people. Enough to constitute one of the largest drug seizures in American history if they could find it. The phrase, the doctor's building, sent analysts into a frenzy of interpretation. It could have been literal, a medical facility. It could have been code. It could have been a nickname. Marsh, who had by now become the unofficial analytical backbone of the operation, went back to her financial records and found it. One of the medical billing companies in Medina's network was headquartered in a 6-story commercial building in Doral, officially housing something called South Atlantic Wellness Partners. The building had an underground parking garage, but it had freight elevator access, and it had been recently retrofitted, according to permit records, with what was described as enhanced climate control ventilation, the kind of modification that would be necessary if you were, say, pressing raw fentanyl powder into counterfeit pills at industrial scale. They had found the drug superlab. It was operating in a commercial office park, behind tinted windows, next to an insurance agency and a dental practice. The decision about when to move was agonizing. The task force wanted Medina himself. They wanted the entire network, not just its physical infrastructure. But every day they waited was another day that fentanyl pills stamped to look like oxycodone or Xanax were flowing into communities across the eastern seaboard. DEA intelligence estimated that the Doral facility was producing between 2 and 3 million counterfeit pills per month, and that Medina's distribution network had penetrated at least 14 states. People were dying, not metaphorically, not statistically, specifically, individually, by name, in emergency rooms and bedrooms and gas station bathrooms. A 20-year-old nursing student in Jacksonville, a 44-year-old construction foreman in Savannah, a 16-year-old in Charlotte who thought she was taking half a Percocet at a party. Task Force Commander Ortega made the call in late April. They would move in 2 phases. Phase 1 would target the Doral facility and the Homestead Warehouse simultaneously, seizing product and production equipment. Phase 2, executed within minutes of Phase 1, Bond would sweep Medina's known associates across Miami-Dade County, including, they hoped, Medina himself. They had traced him, finally, not through technology, but through vanity. Medina, for all his operational discipline, had a weakness: waterfront real estate. Through a series of trusts and nominee purchasers, he had acquired a 3-bedroom condominium in a Brickell tower with floor-to-ceiling views of Biscayne Bay. He visited it irregularly, never staying more than 2 nights, but surveillance teams had confirmed his presence there twice in the preceding month. They would gamble that he'd be there on the morning of the raid. The morning of June 14th arrived thick with humidity, the kind of Miami dawn that feels like breathing through wet. At 5:47 a.m., there were 23 FBI agents and 14 ICEHSI operators staged at a parking structure 4 blocks from the Doral building. Simultaneously, a separate team of DEA and SWAT operators positioned near the Homestead Warehouse. And in Brickell, a third element, smaller, surgical, 8 operators total, waited in 2 unmarked vehicles in the tower's visitor parking area, watching a feed from a surveillance camera they had positioned 3 days earlier in the lobby. At exactly 6 a.m., Ortega spoke one word into a secure radio channel: fracture. The Doral team hit the building through the parking garage and the main entrance simultaneously. What they found inside the fifth-floor suite exceeded even their most alarming projections. 3 industrial pill presses, the size of washing machines, were running, and bins of raw fentanyl powder, later weighed at 412 kilograms, sat in vacuum-sealed containers along one wall. Finished pills, millions of them, filled plastic storage tubs stacked to the ceiling. The air itself was dangerous. Agents in the first wave wore full respirators, and even so, 2 would later be treated for trace fentanyl exposure. 7 workers were inside, 5 of them undocumented immigrants from Honduras who, it would later emerge, had been trafficked into forced labor by Ferrera's recruitment network. They were terrified. They thought they were going to be killed. One of them was 17 years old. The Homestead warehouse yielded a different kind of horror. Not just narcotics, but evidence of the smuggling pipeline itself. Hidden compartments in modified cargo van, forged shipping manifests. Behind a room that appeared to have been used to house migrants in transit, with mattresses on the floor and a padlocked door. And cocaine. Over 1,000 kilos of it, stamped with a scorpion logo that DEA analysts linked to a Sinaloa cartel splinter faction, suggesting that Medina had been brokering supply across cartel lines. A feat of diplomacy as dangerous as it was profitable. In Brickell, things did not go as cleanly. The 8-person team entered the tower lobby at 6:01, identified themselves to the building's overnight security staff, and ascended to the 32nd floor. When they reached Unit 3217, they could hear movement inside. The breach was explosive, a flashbang followed by the ram, the door crashing inward. The overwhelming sensory assault designed to paralyze decision-making for precisely the seconds needed to establish control. Inside, they found 11 people, not the 2 or 3 they'd anticipated. It appeared that Medina had been hosting something, not a party exactly, but a meeting. A summit of his distribution lieutenants gathered in one place at one time. 63 seconds, 11 suspects on the floor, and against the far wall, his back to the panoramic window, hands raised slowly above his head with an expression that one agent later described as almost relieved. Ricardo Medina, El Reloj, the clockmaker. Norwich, the man who had turned Miami into a fentanyl distribution hub reaching from Maine to Mississippi without ever appearing on a single law enforcement radar, until a financial crimes agent noticed a strange payment at a car dealership. On the glass coffee table in front of where Medina had been sitting, agents found 3 encrypted phones, a laptop, and a leather portfolio containing handwritten notes in a personal shorthand that it would take cryptanalysts 2 months to fully decode. Those notes would eventually reveal the full architecture of the network, not just routes and quantities, but the names of port officials in 3 countries who had been bribed, a customs supervisor at Port Everglades who had been on Medina's payroll for 4 years, and most explosively, a local law enforcement officer in Miami-Dade County who had been providing advance warning of patrol schedules and checkpoint locations along known distribution corridors. That officer, a 15-year veteran named in the indictment as Lieutenant Dennis Crow, was arrested at his home 2 days later. He wept. He said he'd started by accepting $500 to share a patrol schedule, and that within 6 months, he was in so deep he couldn't see the surface anymore. The corruption investigation that spun off from his arrest would eventually implicate 2 other officers and a civilian analyst within the department, revealing a quiet rot that had allowed Medina's vehicles to move through South Florida with near impunity for years. The final accounting of Operation Coastal Fracture was staggering. By 412 kilograms of raw fentanyl, over 6 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, 1,060 kilograms of cocaine, 87 kilograms of methamphetamine, 31 firearms, including 3 modified assault-style weapons, 14 vehicles modified with hidden compartments, $47 million in cash and assets, 38 arrests across 4 states, 5 trafficking victims liberated from forced labor, and 1 network, sprawling, sophisticated, and operating in plain sight, dismantled from the inside out. But numbers don't capture what this case really revealed. It revealed that the old model of cartel operations, the fortified compounds in Sinaloa, the drug tunnels at the border, the desert confrontations, is evolving. Medina didn't build a cartel fortress. He built a corporation. He used LLCs and commercial leases and business visas. He hid his super lab next to a dentist. He laundered money through medical billing. He recruited forced labor through the same channels that exploit migrant workers in legitimate industries. He was, in his own terrible way, an innovator. And the only reason he was caught was because one FBI agent pulled a thread on a car dealership payment that seemed slightly wrong. One thread. In a world drowning in data, in a city built on the movement of money, one person noticed one anomaly and refused to let it go. Think about what that means. Think about how many threads go unpulled. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to understand what's happening beneath the surface of cities we think we know. I'll drop a comment with your thoughts on how deep these networks really go. And remember, this is a fictional dramatization, but the crisis it reflects is very, very real. The investigation into the broader network that supplied and profited from Medina's operation remained, as of this telling, ongoing. Some doors, once opened, reveal only more doors, and behind every door, 63 seconds waiting to happen, or not. That's what keeps federal agents awake at night. The operations that never come, the threads that never get pulled, the clockmakers still keeping time.